So I'm going to make this video about something that I call reconstruction. Well, I'm probably not the only person who uses the word reconstruction in the comic book context. I don't hate deconstruction stories. I think, Christopher Priest, I think, does deconstruction pretty well. And I'm a really big fan of Christopher Priest. Whether it's, Superman Lost or Black Adam at the moment. Deathstroke I thought was pretty great. Should probably read his Black Panther at some point. But, he does deconstruction, I think, pretty well because first of all, his deconstruction usually fits within the universe that he's writing. So you're not reading this really consistently miserable, that type of story. And I think where he uses deconstruction, it actually fits. So deconstruction fits Deathstroke and it fits Black Adam, partly because they're villains. And then you look at Superman Lost, where it's obviously is an Elseworld story, so it's a little bit of a different calculation. But deconstruction, I think, has been used quite well sometimes. But I think it's the trope that writers fall back on when I think that they won an award. Deconstruction stories are usually award bait, not just in comics but in film as well. It's almost like kind of a rule that the more miserable your comic is or the more miserable your film is, the more likely you are to get an award. I have no idea what that is. I think people kind of mistake misery for, being profound, which I don't think is really true. But what do I mean by deconstruction and reconstruction? So, the classic definition of deconstruction is you kind of strip away the exterior, you strip away the classic interpretation of something, and you kind of go deeper and you look at what makes it tick. And in things like Watchmen, the question is, what would superheroes be like if they were real? And that's kind of the premise behind The Boys as well. And, that works if that's what you're doing, and it's in a series that's created for that thing, for deconstruction, it works. Which is why The Boys, I think, really works. And why Watchmen worked outside of canon. But I think that the more you do it, especially within canon, it just makes less and less sense, and I think it's worse for the series and for the universe. So for the Unbreakable Argonauts universe, I'm not really interested in deconstruction. I think you can do, somewhat dark stories and intelligent stories without ruining your characters. And so if you look at something like, Strange Adventures, it's fair to say that there wasn't this huge market for an Adam Strange story. The Adam Strange Silver Age stuff doesn't fly off the shelves when they reprint it. So, it's fair enough to point out, there wasn't this big market for Adam Strange before that series, but at the same time, I think that series kind of ruined the character. I mean, everyone just thinks of him as, he's a war criminal now. Even though that series isn't even in canon, you still get a lot of people who look at that and say, okay, the damage is done. I mean, people still point out things that Hal Jordan did, 50 years ago. They still point out things that Hank Pym did, 60 years ago? Even after shifts in canon, even after reboots, people are still pretty much like, this thing happened in the 60s, and because this thing happened in the 60s, this character is, broken and shouldn't be the main Ant-Man or shouldn't be the main Green Lantern because, remember that thing he did in the 1970s? And so I think that's one of the limits of deconstruction. And it's also one of the reasons why I think the companies should be a lot more, they should make a bigger point of the difference between their in-universe stuff and their Elseworld stuff. And one of the problems with to take it back to Adam Strange was that happened right around the time DC kind of said everything is canon. And it just didn't really make sense. So when I say reconstruction, what I mean is basically following through on what I promise you as a reader and as a customer. I want you to have a good experience with the comic. I want you to maybe not have your expectations met in the sense of being predictable, but I want you to come away feeling happy with the comic, and I want you to come away feeling like the story kind of went as it should. There wasn't a bait and switch, and there wasn't a man behind the curtain moment at the end. You were promised an action adventure story, and you got an action adventure story. And I think building up, my hope is that this will become a series, and the hope is that I can build up maybe a reputation as these kind of more sincere stories, because I think, first of all, there are some great writers in comics at the moment. Philip Kennedy Johnson, Robert Venditti, Peter Massey whenever he's on something. So I don't want it to come across as if I'm saying this of all writers, but there is a problem with sincerity and with following through on what you've promised with a lot of writers. I'm not going to name anyone, but there's kind of a few factions in comics writing. There's one group that doesn't, they don't, they're not deconstructionists or anything, but they don't follow through on action either. And so you get these stories where it's, it's a hero or a team mostly known for really kind of high octane action, and you read these series and nothing happens. And so that's kind of one of the types of writers that I would say, the comic book industry would be better to move beyond, or at least encourage those writers to do more action. The second one is the kind of Alan Moore impersonators. People who think that they can just turn in a Watchman, on command. I don't think that's really how it works. I think you kind of have to have this kind of, perfect synergy between the time and the writer and the characters and the idea. And we just don't really get that much. The third type of writer is someone who, they promise big ideas, but they just never follow through. And so they'll come up with this, epic sounding idea. And then their run finishes and they just didn't deliver, and you never really felt like they wanted to deliver. You feel like they wanted to promise this really big idea, and they wanted perhaps, acclaim for a big idea, but they just didn't follow through. And so all three of those things are really what I'm trying to move beyond. So I want a sincere comic. I want a comic that meets your expectations of what a good comic is. And I want a comic that's, it's action-packed, it's fun, there's momentum behind it. And it's the kind of thing where, you could sit down on a Sunday, a boring Sunday, and you could just read through and pick one up after the other and just have a really good time. And so that's what I'm hoping will come away from reading my comic, thinking is, this is fun. This is classic adventure fun. And that you're not going to ever pick up a comic and worry that, not everything is as it seems, and is this the issue where my favorite superhero is revealed to be a killer or something? I just I think that this series is just going to be a lot of fun, and I hope you're back, and the description will be in the comments as always. And yeah, thanks for listening.